Pop Shield, a long-form discussion podcast about musical topics both past and present. I'm Gabe, and I'm joined as always by Dan.
Hello.
And Derek.
Hello.
At the end of our recent episode on Devo, we discussed whether that band's satirical take on pop would even be possible nowadays, and listener Jeremy tweeted us to ask if 100 gecs could be considered a, quote, modern Devo. By the way, you too can tweet us with anything that's on your mind at PopShieldPod. Initially, I thought Jeremy's point was absolutely perfect and really wanted to bring it up in our listener email section. But after talking about it off air, we all agreed that 100 gecs, and this question in particular, were deserving of their very own episode. Also, I learned just a couple days ago that they're dropping a remix album tomorrow, which by the time you're listening will be today. So it's kind of relevant. Anyway, here it goes. A deep dive into 100 gecs' extremely divisive, but in my opinion, instantly iconic debut LP, 1000 gecs from last year, 2019. You know, another reason I was so excited to do this is that we all have such different opinions on 100 gecs, or in Darren's case, a lack thereof. So let's start there. Dan, how did you feel about 100 gecs before this assignment?
Yeah, I like heard about them. I guess last year. It just seemed like it was blowing up on Twitter. We follow a lot of music critics and everybody was loving it. So I was like, oh, I'll check this out. And I really had no idea what it was. And I turned it on and I instantly hated it because it was really nuts. But I was, the album's only like 20 something minutes, so I stuck it through and. Still hated it.
Yeah, I think we might have even brought it up on previous episodes that Dan hates this and I love it. So for me, it was kind of like, I heard people talking about it all the time. It was kind of getting like memed a lot, as some albums do. And so I checked it out probably shortly after it came out. And I was just, I heard like a couple seconds and I was like, nope, I get it. It's meme music. These things come around every once in a while. Fuck this. And then it popped up on the Wire magazine's end of the year list. And I love the Wire. I love reading the Wire. And when they put it there, I was really like, oh, maybe I better give this like a second shot. And I basically just so I started listening like very late, by that time it's like about to be 2020. And I drove like to and from Florida around that time to visit family and you guys, and when traveling was still possible in the United States of America. And I basically just remember listening to this album over and over again, like on those drives, because it doesn't kill a lot of time. It's only like 23 minutes, like you mentioned. But whenever I was like feeling sluggish, because it's a long drive, it's like 15, 16 hours, I would throw this on and I would like just be rejuvenated. It was like a shot of Monster Energy.
I feel so bad for your girlfriend.
She loves it. She loves this album.
Oh God!
I was transporting my cat though, and I don't think he liked it much. But Darren, so you, as I kind of mentioned, didn't know about this, but I'm kind of wondering, like, you've probably heard me and Dan like sort of take jabs at each other about it. Did that make you kind of intrigued, and what were you kind of expecting?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely argue about a lot of different music, and we have opinions that we disagree on and everything. But this was one of the rare times where it seemed like you guys were just on opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of how you felt about this. And I had no knowledge of 100 gecs going into this. I did not know what I was going to hear. I had no idea.
Well, it is kind of funny because I always feel like it's very important that Darren is here because Dan and I like kind of align a lot. Whenever we've done just me and Dan episodes, we like almost always agree on everything. But it is weird that we disagree so much on this. So, it's only a 23-minute album, but I think there is a ton to talk about. And I guess we ought to start by just doing the proper review thing and trying to describe the sound of 1000 gecs by 100 gecs. Maybe Darren can start since he's a first-time listener.
Well, I'll sort of just mention my first impression, right?
Yeah.
It was kind of like an immediate, like, I don't like this. Like, I listened to the album one time and I felt like exhausted by the 23-minute mark. I was like, okay, I'm going to put this away probably for the rest of the day and come back to it. So and that, I think for somebody who's never heard anything about this, or knows anything about it, it might feel that way, right? Because it's just like a overwhelming, like an avalanche of sound,
like
right?
A sugar rush.
Yeah, I mean, it is. You mentioned like a shot of Monster. It right. it sounds like a can of Monster Energy, right?
Right.
I mean, that's just what it is. You're getting all sorts of different like genres. All sorts of like crazy glitchy editing and pitched vocals. I don't know if there's even like a real instrument anywhere. I mean, maybe there's like drums, but basically everything is run through something is what it sounds like, right?
Yeah.
I think we'll get into like the specifics, but like, it's sort of purposely trying to, it's like a sound collage in some ways, right? Just like a lot of different things like thrown together. And it's not necessarily like, it sounds like music of today or of like maybe the recent decade or something like that, right? I mean, there's a lot of elements that and we'll get into it, but like, like something like dubstep really stands out for like a few seconds before it changes to something else that you might recognize. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I've heard it described as like a bunch of trends from the last decade, like thrown into a blender or something. And It does have that kind of like rapid pace, like songs are changing on a dime. There's usually like 4 or 5 ideas crammed into every song, and they're all like a minute 30, or 2 minutes tops. How would you describe it, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, it is like the blender thing's a good description. It sounds like taking pop punk like Blink-182 or something, and breakcore or Venetian snares, something like that, and dubstep, and like mixing that all together. It's like a weird, like, I don't know, like distorted version of pop punk, like and ska and stuff. Like I just kept getting those, especially in the way the vocals are. Like it just always sort of has that like
that emo whine.
Yeah. I guess I say Blink-182 because the most famous, but I guess it like really reminded me of like remember like Newfound Glory.
right.
Like stuff like that, which I don't know how old the people are in this band, but I kind of assume they're around our age, and that was like what was huge when we were in like middle school, early high school, maybe even, and it just sort of feels like a mix of all that kind of stuff, like because dubstep also like started getting popular, like as we were in high school and everything, and it really does just feel like all that kind of thrown together. But the the electronic stuff, I think like it's not that straight like bro step Skrillex thing. There's like little, like Darren said, it's like always sort of rapidly changing. Like you'll get a glimpse of it here and there. But like almost everything just kind of comes and goes.
Well, that I kind of want to like see if we can get to the bottom of that, which is like, is there anything that ties this together? Because I feel like I hear this, or God, there was something else I was listening to recently. Probably one of these like meme things that gets a little buzz here and there. But I was just like, oh, this is extremely 100 gecs sounding. And then I was kind of trying to think like, well, what is the 100 gecs sound then? I mean, for me, there's kind of like a trap pop kind of element running through it. I think that kind of emo rap thing is very prevalent with the, it kind of got big with like the Lil Peeps and even like XXXTentacion and stuff. That kind of like SoundCloud rap scene that brings that like depressive sort of whiny emo quality into trap pop kind of instrumentation. And there are definitely like flickers of all these different genres and stuff. But what do you think, Darren? Is there like something that ties it all together, or is it totally blender approach?
I don't know. It's hard to say, because as soon as I want to like lean into sort of like a dubstep type of foundation, right, it gets yanked in like a different direction. You know what I mean? I did kind of think that there were some elements that really reminded me of that band Sleigh Bells, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And, the thing I liked a lot about Sleigh Bells was just like sort of taking that heavy, sort of rock / like electronic influence right? And sort of that being the foundation for Sleigh Bells. And I feel like that there's some of that here, like underlying most of the album. You know what I mean? Like at least every song kind of returns to that in some way.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder if you could like, yeah, I mean, I think there's that, which is that kind of like mixture of rock and hip hop or something going on.
Yeah.
But I wonder if, Dan, you would use like punk to describe this at all, because to me it's got like something like a punk spirit, which is this kind of like crude amateurism and this, you know what I mean, like rebelliousness or something to it.
I mean, yeah, I'm not one of those people who's, you know, real anal about, you know, what you call punk and everything. I definitely, yeah, I mean, there's definitely that sort of amateur-ish spirit and you know, rebellion even in it. I think it's definitely like fair to say there's like a you know, a punk element. It's weird though, you know, like to your other point, you know, it has like this blender feel, but there definitely is like some sort of like thread tying it together. You know, it has this like collage sound, but it doesn't just sound like a mess. You know, it doesn't, like the whole album like feels like an album. It just feels like an album of like a billion parts. But you know, it's really actually hard to like describe how the sum of the parts, like, you know, the whole like becomes like a whole new thing. Does that make any sense? You know, like,
yeah. Well, let me throw a couple other terms at you. Would you describe it as experimental?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, would you, Darren?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah,
because I think, you know, we'll get into it more, but they have a tendency to kind of like create these incredibly catchy, like kind of weird pop emo trap things, and then just collapse into like chaotic noise, basically, you know? And so that's pretty odd. Another thing I want to ask, another term I wanted to throw out there is like indie. You know, we talk about this all the time and how much of a fan I am of the like indie spirit, you know, not necessarily like indie as a genre or indie meaning independent or anything like that, but this kind of like bedroom pop aesthetic, this kind of like anything goes aesthetic. I mean, it's digital. You can tell that they use like probably even like the stock sounds a lot of the time in like GarageBand or something, you know what I mean? Probably distorted and fucked with and all this stuff, but it's, you know what I mean? It still has that kind of like whatever pops into my head, let's roll with it and see what happens.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I mean, I think when you use like indie and the term, you mean it, you know, not the genre. That's sort of just like the contemporary version of punk, you know, like punk was like getting a couple guys together in your garage with whatever instruments you had and you know, whatever lack of skills you had in playing. And now, you know, that it's just the computer has taken the place of that. And I did see like some interview or something with them. They said that like they the two people like live apart and they like just send files back and forth like through the internet. I think they said they use Logic. You know, so I think that, I mean, that's obviously like a very you know, indie way to do things.
Yeah, I could hear the scare quotes.
I literally did it. I literally did it.
Yeah, like actually physically hear it. What do you think, Darren? Do you think this kind of embodies the indie spirit of that kind of early 2000s era?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I sort of felt that way even before, you know, Dan, you kind of described the way the recording process was done, which that just sort of adds to it for me. You know, just this idea of kind of anything goes, like you mentioned, just throw anything at the wall, whatever you can think of, whatever you're listening to, right? I think that's a really important part of indie, like whatever you're being influenced by in the moment and trying to like match that up with, you know, I don't know, something from the 90s, something from the 80s, whatever else you just have been musically influenced by over the years, right? Right.
Yeah, and I want to bring up, you know, in Pitchfork's review of this album, which was actually not that good of a review, and yet it sort of popped up in their end of the year list as well by the time like the wave had started, of course. There's an interesting line, which is like it's not so, their sound is not really indefinable as much as endlessly identifiable. And so I want to talk about like influences and genres and stuff like that, but do you guys hear it as like a strikingly unique thing, or were you reminded of other artists and that kind of thing?
I mean, I was reminded of other things, like I said, all these like pop punk bands, dubsteppy things, some Venetian snares kind of stuff. But it's the same way, when you listen to, I don't know, Led Zeppelin, you're reminded of like, blues thing and stuff. It's like I think they're making something, and I guess Led Zeppelin's a bad example, but they're sort of making something new out of something old, which I think we've talked about kind of before. That's sort of what all music is. It doesn't really or rarely exist like in a vacuum. Everybody's like sort of it's when you take like your inspirations and things and form something brand new out of it. Just because you can like recognize a piece of it, I think the whole is a new thing.
Yeah, and I guess like maybe you could argue the 100 gecs is kind of like more proud about their influences. Like they're not really afraid that you're going to identify it. And there are some artists that are like that and some that are not. But I just sort of found myself thinking about, I don't know how familiar you guys are with like, artists like, Sophie was really big a couple years back. Charlie XCX has been kind of like trending in this direction for a while, although I think she's heavily influenced by the PC music label. And just this whole kind of like aura of this really, I guess they call it like hyper pop or something, but like this like very maximalist. It's like super shiny and like, big synths and stuff, but it's kind of like tongue in cheek about consumerist culture and like internet culture and that kind of a thing. There's been like that kind of, that's been growing over the course of the decade. So I wonder, like, Darren, does it strike you as these sounds have been around for a while, or is this just like shockingly new for you?
I mean, I feel like the sounds have been around, right? When I listened to this album, I didn't, walk away thinking that, music has been taken in a new direction, right? It sounds like to me familiar in a lot of ways. Like I've heard elements of all of these songs in different places, right? And I think that goes back again to like that blender effect. But when you do something like that, when you blend all of these different genres together and then you kind of warp them, on top of blending them, you do kind of come away with something that is like different, right? I didn't listen to this album and think, oh, this is like a rehash of, blank, whatever you can think of. You know what I mean? Like it's may have been pieced together by stuff that I could recognize, but this is definitely not a situation where, you look to one album and you think, well, this sounds exactly like this other band who is doing exactly the same thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, let me hit you guys with another suggestion here. As big Kanye fans, do you guys hear like a big Yeezus influence over this album?
I mean, I guess if you want to like attribute that sort of like the moments of noise or like industrial sort of sounds to it, you could attribute that to Yeezus. I think, like, especially if we're looking at it like in the pop world. But I mean, I think that could also come from with these people being, like experimental artists. They could have got that from, just noise music or breakcore or, somewhere else. I didn't see anything that was like specifically Yeezus, I didn't think.
I think Gabe is trying to use psychology to
I get it. He's trying to trick me into liking it.
He's a doctor now, all right? You better be careful.
We're gonna see if as part of the aim here is to see if I can change Dan's mind, and he's gonna just try to convince me to hate them. We'll see what happens. But I thought it was weird because it doesn't like really remind me of Yeezus or let's say like Death Grips, and yet it feels like very much in the same ballpark in some way, like that heavily distorted, like aggressive, but also like the chop up quality. Like, I think about that random Hungarian song at the end of New Slaves or something, like that's like a very 100 gecs thing to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny you would mention Death Grips. Like when I was listening to this, like I did keep like thinking of them. Not that it doesn't sound like that at all. It just like sort of feels like it's the same world, like, Death Grips sort of has that whole, like, they're very like, the internet, it's like a very like I don't think a band like that would have existed outside of the internet age, and like,
or think about Do you remember we were talking about on our old podcast? We talked about that JPEG Mafia album, from a couple years ago, and we said that it sounded like, it sounded like scrolling through YouTube comments or something. I think we said,
yeah.
This feels like even more like that.
Yeah, sometimes this feels like scrolling through samples. Like
yeah. What do you think about all this that I'm throwing at you, Darren?
Yeah, I think I agree. I mean, this sort of album, I think you mentioned it, that, it probably wouldn't exist without the internet and the internet culture that we're familiar with. It's like scrolling through basically anything that involves, like a Reddit or whatever, right? Where people are just trying their very hardest to create the next meme or something, you know what I mean? Or desperately trying to go viral in some ways. But again, like that's not, I don't feel like that's like the driving force for this album. It's just another element. It's just another part of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I want to, we're going to continue interrogating all these things. There's a bunch of good points coming up, but it's just like, I just feel the compulsion to like test this album from different angles. And I wonder, Darren, as the resident fan of this kind of world of music, do you hear any kind of like J-pop or K-pop vibes from this? Like the
now
really
it's my
maximalist. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like the yeah, let me prime you here. The like hyper maximalist, like big synths, big sounds, like, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, for sure. I would think that again, you could go and find this exact type of thing somewhere in K-pop. Like a band like Big Bang is definitely known for their like kind of huge like maximalist like sounds, right? And they're not necessarily as chopped up as, or as affected, I guess, as like this music is, but certainly you can, there's definitely similarities for sure.
Yeah, I kept thinking about like the track XXI would never stop UX whatever on this album. It just looks like a file name. It like at the end it starts clipping this vocal like and it's like these big washes of synths. It just made me think so much of like that J-pop artist Capsule.
That's a good one.
That same producer is kind of like involved with a bunch of other projects, Perfume and stuff like that. But they, it was like very big, like maybe 10 years before this, where like these just chop a vocal up and like make a melody out of that. Yep. Anyway, I wanted to ask sort of a side question here, which is that I've been suggesting a bunch of like influences and genres and stuff here, and I sort of thought about like my brain works that way. Like I'm so interested in genres. I think they're like so interesting as categorizations and the way that things either fit or don't fit or intentionally reject or intentionally subvert genres and stuff. But I know that some people are like very anti-genre, you know what I mean? They'll be like, why do you got to classify everything? And I don't know if I've like ever asked you guys, like, are you guys very interested in genre? Or are you more of that, are the kind of school of like, fuck genre, we live in a post-genre world anyway?
I think they have a definite like use, I mean, especially now that there's like so much music, it's just, you kind of got to know at least somewhat what you're getting into, and so I think like when you break it down, like I use Rate Your Music a lot, and there's sort of like, I don't know what the things I look at, there's maybe 100 genres, and just being able to like classify, if you put like Death Grips in the rap genre and you put Kanye, like they're not the same thing, and they don't really sound much alike at all, but it at least gives you like a footing, like, oh, this isn't going to be a drone record or something, it's sort of like when I'm checking out something new, it's like it gives me like I know what mood I want to be in or what time of day or something, I want to listen to something. Also, I think the point or the time when like genre is most important is a lot of times it like actually sort of like is a scene, like post-punk and all, that's sort of like a lot like relates to like a specific place in time, like that's like true, the around CBGB and stuff, krautrock, it means a thing and stuff. And so I think like genre is like very important, like in that sense, when you're putting things, proto-punk, it really gives it like a place in time, and it helps you like because really, I mean, something like say proto punk, you could make a band today that sounds like the Stooges or the Monks or something, but like you wouldn't call it proto punk anymore because like
right.
it's such a like temporal thing. So I like them in both respects. I think they're more important in the the scene sort of way, but I appreciate them in both respects.
I guess, some people they don't like it because it kind of like calcifies the thing. You make something new and then people instantly come up with a genre to describe it, and then other things get boxed into that. Mm-hmm. And so Darren, I mean, how do you feel about the whole genre discussion here?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of torn on it. Like, I don't like to think about genre too much when I think of like when people ask you like, oh, what kind of music do you listen to? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I do agree with that.
Like,
yeah,
that infuriates me. But like, I really love what you were saying, Dan, like thinking about it in terms of like a time in music history, right? The way you describe something like grunge, right? Or whatever, like classic
exactly.
rock, and like you kind of know exactly what you're talking about. Or even if you're just like, yeah, this sounds like it's from the 2010s, like, that's not necessarily a genre, but I like the idea of like thinking about things in terms of like where we are in music history. Like I'm not a big fan of like drilling down into like like subgenres and like very specific, type of genres. I think a lot of the music that we listen to really like crosses over into different genres. I think most of it can probably be described. I try to keep it as general as possible when I'm thinking about, or if I'm categorizing an album, I try to like generalize it, I think. But I definitely like the idea of like thinking of it in terms of like a, music history, like the time that it's coming from,
Yeah. I just like, I really enjoy them. I love like on Rate Your Music, if you like go to like if we go to 1000 gecs, for example, like the genres list are like bubblegum bass, deconstructed club, emo rap, electropop, trap, nightcore, vocal trance, and it's like it almost becomes comical because almost none of those things are like immediately recognizable. They're all like offshoots of other things and stuff like that. And like the way it gets so convoluted, the categorizations, I love it. But so the reason I asked that is like the question is, how do you think 100 gecs, and I didn't really mention, but it's a duo. Dylan and Laura are the two people. How do you think they feel about genre? Like when you hear what this album, 1000 gecs, do you think like they're kind of anti-genre, like anything goes, they don't really think about it? They might even be like opposed in an ethical sense to the idea of categorizing things by genre? Or do you feel more like they're purposely playing with like the idea of pop punk or dubstep or that kind of a thing? You know what I'm trying to get at?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I really like know nothing about this band since I don't like them. But right. I mean, I feel like they're definitely playing with genres here. Like I mean, I think it would be disingenuous to say like, oh, we're not trying to riff on pop punk or something, because there's moments that are like very obviously, and like some video I watched about it, it does like sample some ska song that I've never heard of. Right. So like, I mean, when you're sampling things and whatnot, I think it, you have to know. And I think it's sort of disingenuous to not, say that you're doing that. But I mean, also a lot of times, like with the experimental type, artists, they're the ones who get all been out of shape about genre, so I really don't know enough about them.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like, what do you think, Darren? Just basically, if your only evidence was listening to this album, how do you think they feel about genre as categorizations?
Yeah, I mean, I imagine they're probably not a huge fan of it, but I kind of like what Dan was saying, like they don't, and you even mentioned this, Gabe, like they're not ashamed of their influences. They're not trying to hide their influences. You know what I mean? I don't necessarily get the impression that they're necessarily trying to like break genres, right? Or just like shatter your mind or whatever, completely flip things on their head. I just think that they are probably huge fans of a lot of different genres. Mm-hmm. And, I think it's fair to say that most bands start somewhere, right? They start with some sort of influence, and you add more, and you start to like you start to carve out your own space, but you can see the threads like of where you came from. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Well, that's that kind of starts to transition us into the next thing I want to talk about, which is like non-musical influences on 100 gecs, which is not always like a super relevant topic with artists that we talk about, but I think here it especially is because, you know, we were sort of alluding to it, but stuff like the idea of YouTube, the idea of SoundCloud, TikTok, I keep thinking about, you know, like you know these TikTok videos where it's like, and they did this on Vine too, but like where it's comically distorted, like when the song kicks in, like the bass drops, it's like, you know, and like it almost feels like the bass sound on this album is based on TikTok videos of like distorting bass. Internet culture in general, you know, like I sort of dismissed a lot of this type of music as like meme music, but in this case, it feels like very deliberate that like they are kind of, you know, trying to like play with the what are even our memes? Like they're like weird copies of things and twists and subversions of things. Like the way they treat genre is the way we treat, you know what I mean? Like screen grabs of movies and shows and stuff like that. Like, how do you guys see this stuff playing into this?
Yeah, I think you're right. You know, I think the non-musical influence here is much more like evident and important than really anything else I can think of that we've covered, you know, because like people, you know, talk about like SoundCloud rap, and that's sort of become a genre. Like you know what that means, and I feel like you can hear bits and pieces of that here. I think even just like that the way the record like switches between things, you know, that's a super like. You know, people always
digital age.
Yeah, exactly. People always talk about like our, you know, our attention spans are much smaller now. You know, I mean, I know personally if a YouTube video's over like 5 minutes, I'm not gonna watch it. You know.
Yeah, it's funny too because I listen to all my podcasts on double speed, and whenever I watch a YouTube video, I like double the speed.
Jeez.
And it's funny because it kind of sounds like I just need more content, but it's like It creates a quality which is not unlike the vocals on this album, you know, in the sense that they're like pitched up, like everything is too fast, you know, because like I'm trying to just scroll through videos as fast as possible. Do you hear any of this stuff in there, Darren?
I mean, absolutely. You know, I don't think that this album exists without TikTok and internet culture and all those things, you know, but I do think that it falls in line with what a lot of music has done over the years, like making commentary on like society, right? Like social commentary, you know, it's in certain decades it's all about the politics, and you know, I think it has everything to do with like the communication aspect and what people are consuming, right? And that has changed obviously in the last like 15 or 20 years with the internet, and probably even more so in the last 5 years, right? And this is the music that kind of represents that in a way, right?
Yeah.
Like if you wanted to show somebody, or like, you know, here's the music of 2020 or 2019, right? This would probably be a good way to like sort of say this kind of represents a lot of what's going on, you know? Not everything, but a lot.
It does, but it's also kind of like a commentary on it, which makes it not it, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
right.
If historians listen to this and thought that like everyone in the world was listening to this kind of stuff, like they would be very, very wrong. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like a weird, twisted, warped version of it.
This is like, hey, this is the history book of, you know, like...
yeah. But it's also like very interested in subcultures, I think. And I wanted to mention specifically, like, I didn't really appreciate it until I was thinking about it while listening to this week, but it's like, there were all these little subcultures basically on YouTube and SoundCloud over this past decade that were like based on like, you know, playing with music. So they mentioned like Nightcore as an influence in one of those interviews that I linked you guys to, and it's like I'm not that familiar with it, but I guess Nightcore is just basically like speeding up random songs. You know what I mean? So it's like the YouTube video would just have, you know, some anime GIF or something, and it would just be like a ska song played really fast, right? And that they kind of like think that's cool. But there's other stuff, you know, like vaporwave, right? Which we've talked about plenty of times, but it's like the idea of it's basically another song, but the thing that makes it a vaporwave song is that you've like twisted it in this weird vaporwavy way. I even sort of had this epiphany that like maybe dubstep was the first genre of this kind, where it's like a genre but not really a genre, where, you know, the idea was like, I don't even know how to express this. It's like what you do to a song is what makes it dubstep. So you remember how it would be like people would link each other, like did you hear this? Like, it's a dubstep version of NSYNC's Bye Bye Bye. You know what I mean? Like, and you'd be like, oh, that's so funny. Like, I got to check that out. Like, that was the thing. And so this kind of carried on through the decade. Like, dude, check this out. It's vaporwave of, whatever, Fiona Apple, or it's like, a Nightcore version of Blink-182. You know what I mean? Like, that feels like actually very, very central to this album.
Yeah, that's a good point. I do remember, vaporwave of like the Seinfeld theme, and and stuff like that. I think that I didn't think of that, but yeah, I could see it.
But you know what I mean, Darren? How it's kind of like the way that they're so self-aware about the genres that they're playing with, at least in my opinion, is kind of like the spirit of these internet sensations of like transforming songs in some way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I can definitely see where this kind of falls in line with that. I mean, I remember people like, there was a whole thing about slowing music down, right? Like this, I got the CD rip of all these like hip hop songs, super slow.
Oh yeah, Chopped and Screwed. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that even like predates this by quite a lot, which is really strange. I'm sure there's been some interesting like think pieces on it, but yeah, I mean, obviously like Chopped and Screwed is like the proto vaporwave. I remember somebody gave me a ride home from that shitty dishwashing job that I
That's
had
exactly the timeline that I'm thinking.
Yeah,
here.
And he was like, check out this new song, dude. It's not even out yet, and it was "Ridin' Dirty" by Chameleonaire, which I had not heard yet. To his credit, it might have actually been a leak of some kind, and it was like slowed way down, and I was like, why are you listening to this music slowed down? I couldn't even like fathom it. This is a long time before any of this shit started, but now it's like it's here to stay. So I want to, we're not like big lyric people, but I think we should address them as we kind of try to get into like what the ethos of 100 gecs is, which is kind of like a big mystery to me, and I think really relevant to Jeremy's question that kicked this whole thing off. Like what are they actually doing? Like, are they satirizing? Are they what? But how would you kind of sum up the lyrical themes style of this album?
I think like the lyrics are like clearly making fun of capitalist kind of things. I think in the sense that like like rap always like, especially like in the earlier early 2000s or whatever, it had like this sort of thing about it. It's all about money and cars and all these like
partying and all that.
Yeah, exactly. And so it sort of like feels like they're satirizing or making fun of like that sort of like thought, like this just like overly object obsessed like society, which still like exists in things, but like that's how I felt. It all seems like what's the song, the Stupid Horse, like it's talking about a Porsche and money machine, like everything basically has to do with like money or an object or something like that, and almost every song.
Yeah, and then there's, I think about like 800 dB Cloud, which is a fucking hilarious title, by the way. But just the way that it's like has these kind of, there are times we didn't even mention sort of that it gets into like, I think quite like intimate bedroom indie vibes sometimes. Like there's just this like lightly plucked like guitar type sound and a very tender like love scene in this opening thing, and then it like blasts into this banger territory, and it's all about like smoking a lot of weed and like drinking a lot and stuff, and I'm addicted to monster money and weed, is a lyric here. I'm blowing clouds so loud you can't fucking see, so it's definitely like in there, but it does feel like a wink and a nod every time. I mean, how would you describe the lyrical themes here, Darren?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a clear direction to, satirize things, right? And I think that they are somewhat like on the attack of like, the only way I can really think to describe it is sort of like being in high school and looking at the different like cliques of people that or that you were going to school with, you know what I mean? And sort of the resentment of the crowd of people who looked at like the most popular people, right? And then those most popular people grow up to be, you know, the people that they're sort of talking about here, the money machine, the people driving around in their, big trucks or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, the people who look down at everyone else, they're sort of they're like making fun of them by like trying to act like how they perceive them to be, essentially.
Yeah. I can hear that. And I think like overall the lyrics are very tropey a lot of the time, just like the treatment of genre, I think, is where it's like, like this is gonna be like a diss song, Money Machine, with like you talk a lot of big game for someone with such a small truck, like an iconic monologue at the beginning. Hey, you little piss baby. So fucking funny. Or like, like at the end of Hand Crushed by a Mallet, like, you just copy everything we do. If I wasn't me, I'd copy me too. It's just like, you know what I mean? Like that tropey kind of shit talk. You know what I mean? Like when you're watching like a video of some rapper freestyling and they kind of like can't think of anything, so they just say some disses. You know what I mean? They just
exactly.
There's a lot of like that kind of stuff. So this is like, I mean, we've already started getting into it, but I wanted to kind of get into that so that we could try to figure out, like, are they making fun of what they're doing? Are they satirizing internet culture? Are they satirizing like hip hop? Are they, intentionally shitting on TikTok as a thing? Or do you feel more like they love all of this stuff?
I don't know. I take it as satirizing it, but maybe that's just my own like projection, Like I like I said, I don't actually know anything about like the people in this band. So I feel like they're making fun of it, but maybe it's because like if I made the like exact same, song, I would be making fun of it. And I think, I think like that thing in the beginning of Money Machine, I think that's that seems like a pretty big clue that they're making fun of it, Yeah. Like, that doesn't seem like.
But I mean, like, do you think they like ska? When you hear Stupid Horse, are you like, these guys are ska fans, or is it?
Okay.
They're making fun of ska.
I think that might be like. I think they probably like it, maybe in that that sort of like nostalgia kind of way. Like I said, like I don't know how old they are, but I assume they're somewhere around our age. And it's like, I wouldn't say I like Blink-182 anymore, but like, if someone, if it's on the radio or I hear it somewhere, I get that sort of like, oh yeah, they were a good band, kind of thing. Even like when I was listening to this record, there were moments where I was like, I should try out a Blink record. And, I stopped myself because I know it'll, probably not hold up. But, like,
right.
It's like, I wouldn't say I like it, but it's like, there's some sort of like nostalgia there. I think it's maybe that, but maybe they're just like, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, what do you think, Derek? Because there are other parts like in that Would Never Stop song I mentioned earlier, or like the last song actually comes up quite a lot where it's like that kind of like, what do they call it? Like trance, like vocal trance music or something. It's got the like big washy synths, and then you'll hear like the little clap come in, like clap, 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 as it like builds up, like do 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 do, and like some really shitty lyrics, like giving my heart to you to take da 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 da, like do they like that shit, or are they making fun of that shit?
I don't know. I listened to this whole record thinking that they were big fans of the music that they were influenced by. You know what I mean? Like I think that they love ska. I think that they love like, those sort of like sleigh bells type of moments where the music comes down heavy. I think that the screamo parts, I think that they're fans of that stuff. You know what I mean? I think that that's all part of
like dubstep.
Yeah. I think that's how I perceive it. Anyway, I think that they're just mashing it up all together because they enjoy it, and maybe through the mashing up of all of this, they sort of discovered like how wild this all is, and maybe that influenced how they wrote the lyrics. I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to get into that, but like to me, I think that they at least are fans of a lot of these different musical genres. But maybe they're using them through the process of mashing them together, they're sort of creating this like, I don't know, way to like satirize it all or just make fun of it. But I still think that they're influential on them. I don't know. It's hard to describe, I guess.
Yeah. I kind of went back and forth because I was like, there are no people that like that kind of vocal trance shit. like in the world. Nobody exists that even likes that. You know what I mean? And like dubstep is the lamest shit ever, and everybody knows it. And there's no way they're actual fans. You know, same with ska or whatever. But then I was like, you know, but there's clearly like an affection. And what I kind of settled on, I wonder what you guys think of this theory, is that I wonder if it's kind of similar to the way that we feel about memes. You know, like if you were just like some person who had never been on the internet before, and you like created a show, let's say like The Office, and then you went on Twitter and you saw all these Office memes, you would kind of think that they're making fun of your show. You know what I mean? You'd be like, what the fuck? Like, what did I do? But actually there is no like, you know, greater compliment in today's age than like your show getting meme to hell.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So it's kind of like it's a simultaneous like affection and making fun of it. Like people really love SpongeBob, but they're also kind of making fun of SpongeBob. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I get you, and I think that's sort of, you know, what I meant. You know, it's like I think like with the SpongeBob thing, it's got like that nostalgia. You know, it's like something that's like it's. I mean, I'm a little too old for it. I never really watched it, but you know, it's something that like I assume is like, you know, good. It's like actually, I've always heard it's like an actually like a pretty good show. But you know, like it's maybe, I don't know. I don't know what I'm saying.
Well, it's like to me, it's, you know, the meme has like outgrown the show itself, right? Like you wouldn't necessarily sit down and watch the entire SpongeBob series. You don't need to, right? You may have some nostalgic memories about it, but now it's like sort of outgrown the actual show itself and become something entirely different that you at least have some connection to, but it's not like deep enough that you need to go and sit down and watch the series. You know what I mean? And the way they use something like dubstep here, like, yeah, sure, no one really likes dubstep, but we're all familiar with it. We understand what it's trying to do, and they're trying to like not just focus on the dubstep, but they're using it as like, you know, sort of like a tool here, right?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, actually. Like with those memes, like I only watched The Office for the first time like last year, and I mean I understood like the memes of, you know, it's like you get, you know, when he's looking at like the guys, you know, pointing to that chalkboard thing or whatever, you understand that even if you've never seen the show, you know. So yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just weird that like everything today is kind of like ironic but sincere at the same time. And we talked about this on that Devo episode. We were saying like that's why it would be so hard for a Devo to exist. And on that note, I want to like ask, does 100 gecs have kind of a mission statement that you think you can parse out here? Because with Devo, we got the, you know, truth about de-evolution, and they have this whole like lore around them. And it was very helpful because you know where you're starting from. You know what I mean? Like, I think if you were just listening to Devo, you would have your suspicions, you know, when you heard like the Rolling Stones cover, like we talked about. But you wouldn't, I don't think, like fully be able to get, I think Darren even admitted, you know, that like he wouldn't get any of this like extra commentary on society stuff if he didn't know all of that background reading. You know what I mean? So with no truth about de-evolution to go off of, what is like the 100 gecs mission statement, do you think? I mean, is it kind of like, just to throw one thing out there, like kind of like fuck high and low culture, like there's no difference, you know, we can jump from ska to experimental noise and it's all the same thing?
Yeah, I think that's actually a good like mission statement or whatever for them. Yeah, I don't know if they like specifically have one like Devo did. You know, Devo wrote things, and you know, you gotta also think like Devo was a time like if you were listening to that, like you physically had a record with a jacket that you could put information on, you know, whereas like now you basically get, you know, the little picture that's on Spotify, and that's it for a lot of people. You know, a lot of people aren't going to dig any deeper. I think like, you know, we haven't really mentioned it, but like all the like vocals, or most of the vocals at least, like on this record, they're like pitched in a way that's like very sort of silly, and I think that's like kind of the little bit of a key that they're joking, you know, like
That's true. Yeah.
It made me.
Is it kind of Ween-esque?
That's what I was just
going to
say.
That pump a little bit more here.
That's what I was gonna say. Actually, like it made me think of like Ween. Ween's like very famous for always like speeding up or slowing down like the vocals to change the pitch, and like I feel like that's like the kind of the first clue, I especially on a quote unquote like normal Ween song, that's not about like something, it's not about like farting or something. It's like it's like it's the clue that they're kind of tongue in cheek or joking, and like I feel that here, because if the vocals were like more earnest, I think you would I think it would be much more of a question of like, oh, is this just a dubstep band or something, And I think like they make it like, even if they enjoy those things, like we were saying, or they're saying that there is no separation between like high and low culture. I think like by putting that voice, you say that is the the key to it being tongue in cheek, Whereas with Devo, I think that like. That, and we talked about it on that episode, like that Rolling Stone cover, like the way they like completely like deconstruct it, that's like the key that they're doing something, to established culture or whatever, and I think here I really think it's that like quote unquote silly vocal.
Yeah, what do you think, Darren? Like what is their ethos?
Yeah, so I think that very similar. So when I came out of the Devo discussion, right, I sort of described it as their music being for, a certain group of people against another group of people, right? And I was on the wrong side of that coming out of that conversation. And I think that 100 gecs has a very similar thing. Like I feel like this music, as soon as I started listening to it, I was like, this music is for a certain group of people who will get it. Like they'll quickly understand that this is not meant for the mainstream folk, right? Yeah, but it's using all of that stuff. So I kind of put this to the test, and I let somebody who I work with listen to it. I was like, you got to check this out, because I really, I kind of understand a little bit about, she shares some of the music that she listens to. So I just like, this should like be what she's listening to, right? And so she puts it on, and she kind of immediately like dismisses it, like just not really into it. And I was like, huh. So I'm on the side where it's like, I get it. Like this this is not for you, but
this
is
exactly,
your feels good.
It's exactly what you should be listening to. So I feel very good about this.
Yeah. I mean, they do have this kind of like vibe of being pranksters or trolls, as we would call them in this century. But it's like, I wanted to kind of just briefly mention their like image or lack thereof. They kind of have, they do interviews and stuff. It's not like a big secret who they are. And yet I just kind of love, like immediately upon listening, I loved like the mystery around it, where like the album cover is just this weird, spooky looking picture of like this tree and two people facing away from you, looking at not even looking at the tree. They just seem like they're like facing away from us. And it just kind of adds this like weird quality to their music, which is like, you know what I mean? Like they're boxing you out. Like you'll never really get it. It's always like they're making jokes and you laugh because you like want to be cool like them or whatever, but they're really inside jokes. I don't know. We talked about this with Devo, and I just feel like there's that same kind of quality of like in and out thing. And I guess Darren was kind of confirming that with some scientific testing. Another thing I want to ask is like, I hear a lot of people sort of claim that 100 gecs is kind of like the definitive Gen Z group or something, that they kind of just sum up this whole TikTok world and this era and stuff. And I guess for clarity's sake, we're millennials, firmly millennials, all of us. But I did a little research, and it turns out that they're in their mid 20s. They're like 25 and 26, I guess. And so they are technically like just on the outside of Gen Z. Like Gen Z, you have to be born in 97 or 98 or something like that. So you know what I mean? Like, are they commenting on Gen Z culture, or are they fully embedded in it?
I think it's like an embeddedness of it, because like you said, we're millennials. I was born in 87, and like I know about all this stuff. I mean, I like music, so I like keep up with it, but like I spend a shit ton of my time like hanging out on Reddit and stuff. Like I'm in the know. I know all the cool memes the kids are saying these days.
Right.
You know, like
Hey,
I've
cool kids.
yeah, I've seen the TikTok compilations. But no, you know what I mean? Like I think they're in it. I don't know if it's like incredibly Gen Z, because I don't think, like, you know, like these things that they're sampling, like the ska song and this pop punk stuff. I don't.
Yeah, isn't that
I don't
weird?
feel like that's a real Gen Z thing. But then again, like I have two sisters, and they're 10 and like 12 years younger than me, and they like. They sometimes like get into, like, they'll post, you know, what they're listening to on Instagram or whatever, and like what was it? My one sister was, she posted something. It was like it was oh man, it was like I don't think it was Seether, but it was something like that, you know.
Okay.
And it's like because like when she was, you know, she was like a really little kid when that was like around, you know, popular and stuff. And it's like I don't know if she's like, you know, listening to it in like
weird,
a,
right?
you know,
Because like emo came back in the rap world. Like,
oh,
in
it
a
was
big
3
way.
Days Grace. That's what it was.
Okay, I remember them. I saw them.
Live.
Nice.
That's right.
Hell yeah! I think it was with Seether and Evanescence.
Nice. That's a lineup
Also
right
correct. Yep.
I had to take my brother to that concert, to be fair. But what was I going to say? But no, like emo came back in a big way, and I feel like that really predates Gen Z, and yet they have this kind of like nostalgic fascination for it. And I guess that makes sense. I mean, we all had like a nostalgic thing for Nirvana, like we missed that, and yet,
Yeah.
you know, it was really just like 5 years too early or something like that. But we like were very, very into it, and it was, I think, very common for our generation to be very into it. So it's not impossible that like emo or Newfound Glory or something are staples of Gen Z. But you know, what do you think, Darren? Are they in it? Are they on the outside looking in? What's going on there?
I don't know. I think that they're sort of in it. You know what I mean? I do agree with what you're saying regarding like some music just seems to fit in well with a certain age group, right? Like it's just I don't know. It's just the way the music. I don't know what I'm trying to say, I guess, but like when I think about Nirvana, right? Like you mentioned, it was it was way over. Like Kurt Cobain was long gone when we finally got into it, but it felt like it was just now happening for us, right? It didn't feel like a thing of the past. It felt like it was happening right then and there.
Yeah,
and
that's
so
true.
This feels like it's of the moment in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah,
I don't know though whether it would, you know, in 10 years from now, you know, have such an impact on, I don't know, you know, 20-year-olds, right? Of 10 years from now, because music just seems to be moving in at a different pace now, right?
Yeah, I'm just, you know, I'm assuming the answer is no. But did either of you guys check out that HBO show Euphoria?
No, I don't
I've
have
been
HBO.
meaning to though.
Well, I like the show, but it's basically about these Gen Z kids, and it's like, you know, they're fucking doing acid like constantly, and they're like, you know, popping pills and having like crazy sex and like just crazy parties. And, you know, I came to realize, like, you know, everybody was championing it, like, oh, this is like the first like Gen Z show, and I was like, this is definitely not, like, this is some millennials made a show about what they think Gen Z is, you know what I mean? And so I wonder, like, is 100 gecs that? And I wonder if I can't even know because I'm not a Gen Zer, you know, so I'll never fully know. But it feels so insane, so exaggerated as far as like the hyperness of it, that it's, you know, I guess we can't answer, but it's like, it sometimes feels like they're commenting on the things of their era, or they're fully in it, you know, because I don't know what defines Gen Z. Like, maybe it's just that people who never did not have the internet, you know what I mean? Like we all remember not really having internet.
Yeah.
But we're the last ones. They grew up like, and they have it all the time, and they're like fully on it. And this sounds like two people who have never not been on the internet, you know what I mean? But who knows if they're kind of like role playing at that. The other question though on that note is, like, we've talked about this before, but it feels like a very not Gen Z thing to do, very not Cash Money thing to do, to use a meme that maybe 100 gecs like, to make an album. You know what I mean? I feel like I'm a little bit out of touch with this era, and I don't know a lot of these big artists that are considered like in the same world as this, like that come from SoundCloud and YouTube and stuff, because I'm just like, an old millennial dude, and if you don't make an album, I'm not listening to you, pretty much. Like, there are some singles that trickle into my, ecosystem. Like, I love the XXXTentacion song, like Look at Me, and what's his other song about wanting to kill himself or whatever? I can't remember, Sad or something. But they're great songs, but it's like, I feel like if you don't drop a great album, like, you're just nothing to me. And that feels very much not of the era. I think that's why I'm missing out a lot of things. And 100 gecs made a 23-minute album, but it does feel like they decided to make a proper album statement. So what do you make of that? Why not, if they're so Gen Z, why not just stick in the SoundCloud world and drop Lucy's for the rest of their lives?
Yeah, no, that's a good point, and I think that might be, the sort of millennial role playing as a Gen Z sort of thing. Because you're right, I'm the same way. I mean, basically, if you're dropping a single, it's not gonna hit. You have to be like somebody I really care about for me to like listen to a single. I don't make playlists. I have one playlist for like if I have people over one time a year or something, kind of thing. Like I don't listen to music that way. I put an album on and I listen to it from front to back. Yeah. And I mean, I even say front to back because I'm, old enough to even say that, I don't know. I mean, at least like 23 minutes is in that like, shortened, attention span sort of world, which I do love. I've said it 100 times on this podcast. Like I really do enjoy like when people, especially when you're making something like this, certain things work in the long album, your drone things, experimental things like that. But stuff like this, if this was 45 minutes, 60 minutes, like it would get even more exhausting than it is at 23 minutes. It would just be like basically unlistenable, I think.
Yeah. I mean, you've mentioned on the show before, Darren, like your son, your Gen Z son, who, seems to have like no real interest in listening to albums, right? And you don't really sense that like any of his friends are into like the album experience.
I question whether they even know what an album is.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like that's going to be the dividing line. Like that's where I'm always, paranoid. Like when am I going to lose touch with popular culture? And this is going to be it, because I hear like buzz about these kind of SoundCloud type artists, and I'll be like, I'll check them out when they drop their album. I'll check. That's when I'll get to it. And it just sometimes never comes, and so I miss it. But that's going to be probably the dividing line. Is like if you don't make albums, you're not going to reach like the millennial and earliers. And if you do, you're not going to reach the Gen Zers. So why did 100 gecs decide to make an album? I mean, we'll talk about it more specifically, but like they got interlude tracks here and stuff. They got flow. They got like a crescendo at the end of the album and everything. The longest song, the epic of the album at 3 minutes and like 18 seconds. What do you make of that decision, Darren?
I mean, it's fascinating, right? It's almost like they were doing a courtesy to us old guys.
Right.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. And I think it does go into, the influence bucket, right? I mean, sure, a lot of the sound is coming from things of the last like decade, I suppose, but why maybe there's an influence somewhere that they're just into the album idea as well. You know what I mean? I think it really is a dividing line. I mean, kids these days, they play video games and they're just looking for like the next hottest playlist to throw on while they're like playing their game or doing something else. You know what I mean? Like it has to be immediate. There is no time to listen to a 45, 50-minute album and listen to an interlude. Like that just can't happen, and it's difficult for me because I spend so much time like in a car with my family and all my kids and stuff, and like no one is going to put up with me putting an album on. You know what I mean? Like it's so difficult to try to do that, like to find an album that works for everybody. I mean, the Beatles are usually like my go-to because I can just like, the Beatles are just good for everyone. But so I have developed some playlist so that I can at least get some of the music that I really love to influence them in some way. But I don't expect anybody to be like, hey, that like song, is that Bob Dylan? Like, I want to hear more of that, or like, whatever. Yeah. It would just be that one song that they might like. You know what I mean? I'll give you an example, right? So on this playlist, I have this song by the Microphones. Which one is it?
I can't even take a stab because I don't know I can't think of a microphone song. It's
No,
like
there's a really short
catchy
one.
and
There's a really
palatable.
short one on there. It's just an acoustic number.
This
No,
makes
I
for
really
great
want-
radio, by the way.
No. You just cut this. Just cut this, right? Oh, okay. I
See
felt
us
your
making
shape.
fun of it now. We don't have to cut it.
Yeah.
There's a little industry tip for you.
It's
Okay,
from
I Felt Your
I
Shape.
Felt Your Shape from the Glow Part 2, and I heard Brandon like humming it to himself. He was singing the lyrics, and I was like, okay, yeah, that's
Wow.
cool. But he would never ever ask like, where did this come from? I want to hear the record, right?
Yeah.
And I can't imagine him
Yeah.
listening to like the Glow Part 2 or something, you know?
Yeah, and it might not even occur to him that it like comes from somewhere, like
Right.
comes from a larger piece.
Precisely.
But maybe that's something you grow out of though, because like think about it, like when I was a kid, you know, like my dad liked what we call dad rock, and I wouldn't hate it just because, you know, it's not cool because your dad likes it. But now, like I like Led Zeppelin and stuff, you know.
Yeah,
And even I think like when I was a kid, like I would buy a CD a lot of time because I knew the big hit song or something, and like, you know, like I can remember buying like the Smash Mouth CD, and I don't think I've ever listened to like that entire album. You know, I just listened to, you know, your All Star and whatever. You know what I mean? Like, but now I would never do that. You know, I would never just listen to like a hit single of a song.
I mean, yeah, I guess it's not like it's not a totally new phenomenon that there are like people who are only interested in songs.
Yeah.
I think it's just much easier to do it now, you know, because when you bought a CD, like one, you paid, you know, $13 or whatever, so you got to get your money's worth. And, you know, if you're switching between stuff, like until you were able to burn your own CD, you know, it was like sort of hard to like have a playlist, you know?
I guess we'll just have to wait and see on that. Maybe like this whole generation will like get older and be interested in albums.
They better.
But you know, yeah. Otherwise, we're screwed. But yeah. I mean, so what do you make of specifically the decision to put interlude tracks on here? They're not going on any playlist. They make no sense on their own. We can talk about like, do you even like them in the context of the album, because they're pretty crazy. But why did they add these? Why did they want this thing to flow?
I think when you add like the interlude track, you're saying like this is an album, like this is a you know, one piece of like, you know, art or whatever. And I mean, I'll say I like the inclusion of the interlude tracks because the inclusion. I don't like the tracks themselves. I like the inclusion thereof, because it makes like this cohesive, you know, piece. Like I think this record would be a lot, you know, more difficult to listen to if it was just like a bunch of these, you know, crazy songs back to back to back to back. These interlude things, like, I mean, even though like gecs, you know, is just. Is like really crazy in and of itself. It's sort of like even in that like craziness of a guy just saying gek. It like it kind of gives you like a second to breathe if that like makes, you know, like the shortest of breath in there. And I think like even at 23 minutes, like this is a type of record that would get like exhausting after too much time, just because of like that overly sugary, you know, nature of it, you know. So I think it really like helps those, you know, helps that. It's like you know, you can't drink a whole monster in one sip. Right. You know, you need
to hit the jewel in between.
Exactly. It's hitting the jewel. Perfect.
Yeah, that's basically what it is. Yeah, I can't say that like I love the tracks, but I do love like their role here. They both sound like, and they actually compare them to this in an interview, I think, of like scrolling through samples. You know what I mean? Like if you just had the sample bank and you were like scrolling through it, because it just really just chops and it keeps sounding like it's about to become something but never quite does. You know, the I Need Help Immediately, it gets like this lopsided beat at the end that kind of like drives us home there, which, you know, does make it like ties it together a little bit. Gek ends with like actually a very beautiful auto-tuned like ballad all of a sudden. But before that, it's like crazy, like with the dubstep, like fucking wildness for just like 12 seconds. What do you make of these tracks, Darren?
Yeah, I mean, arguably, I didn't really, or I guess honestly is what I should say, I didn't really identify them as being like all that different from the other songs on the album. You know what I mean?
Interesting.
Because, you know, sometimes like an interlude is like very, very like wildly different, really. You know, like it's just something completely unexpected. But in my listening of this, and maybe it's just the pace and the way it's only 23 minutes, you know, I didn't really feel like that this was like a slowdown or like a, you know, the momentum didn't seem to like come to a halt with this, right? But thinking back on them and kind of like thinking about them now as true interludes, you know, I think they're actually pretty cool. You know, I like the idea of it, like you mentioned, Dan. I think it gives them an opportunity to sort of stretch out a little bit and reset, like you mentioned. And it doesn't, like I mentioned, it didn't kill the momentum at all for me, right? It just kind of was a nice little reset, a breather, like you mentioned, Dan.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think it's a cool idea. I mean, like, how often, I'll make music or something. You come up with like, a sample that's really cool, or like a synth patch that's really cool or something. But it's like you just can't like ever find any way to actually use it, or a beat or something. And it's like, why not just fucking like dump it, so everybody has to hear it for a second. And it's like you got to use it, but so it's sort of like a non-wasteful like way to make music.
Yeah,
which I
very green, very Gen Z.
Like
they're into the recycling and everything. Yeah. So I thought that we would like not have enough to talk about with a 23-minute album, and that we'd like be able to dive deep into pretty much every song here. But we actually have had a shit ton to talk about. So. Maybe we could just identify like a highlight or two, something we want to single in particular on this album.
I mean, I would say like the big like, hits to be the ones that like got stuck in my head, for better or for worse over the weeks, were like Stupid Horse, like that is the most catchy one. Ringtone a lot, and then Money Machine. I think those three are sort of, if you're gonna give it a shot, maybe if you don't want to waste 23 minutes, like at least I think you'll get the idea from those. And I mean, they are like they're extremely catchy. Like I think they're extremely like effective at what they're trying to do.
Yeah, what were some highlights for you, Darren?
Yeah, I mean, all three of those were highlights. I would have mentioned the XX I Would Never Stop stuff. that one. Just like you said, Dan, there's just so many like catchy moments, and I know I mentioned that I like sort of didn't like this at first, right? I was very put off by it, but I kind of quickly liked it, right? And just kind of kept on playing it, and it became something that I would play a lot while I was working. I'm working from home right now, and it's it doesn't kill a lot of time, like you mentioned, Cave. So I was just kind of repeating it on and over and over and over again, and I just kept liking it more and more rather than like feeling tired of it or like hating it the more I listened to it,
Yeah, I can like easily listen to this over and over again. And like for some reason a track like Stupid Horse, like I feel like I could just listen to that on repeat for the rest of my life, because it's like it is so catchy. It is such a rush. Like it's like basically like techno BPM, you know what I mean? And it's like it sounds like almost polka-y, like I just, maybe if you're a big Nightcore fan, maybe you knew this, but I didn't know that like if you sped up a ska song fast enough, it would turn into like techno polka or something like that. And it's just mind-boggling. My favorite song, for some reason, I don't hear a lot of people like highlighting this one, but is Hand Crushed by a Mallet, which is like, it's just like brilliant how it starts off in this kind of like the emo way, with these like EDM kind of, big lush synth chords and stuff, and just starts transitioning flawlessly into like the trappiest trap pop thing, back into the emo, into like bedroom indie pop, and it's just like an absolute banger. And I also want to really highlight the last song, Geck to You. To me, it is nothing short of a fucking miracle that like the end of the song. The end of the song is fucking transcendent, the way it just speeds up and continues to speed up, get more distorted, more layers, like, you know what I mean? Like, we've been on a very high level for this entire 23 minutes at this point, and the fact that like the last minute of that song can then like quadruple the energy level, I'm like, every time the album ends, I like have to catch my breath. I can't even believe what just happened to me. Do you guys, Darren, do you love the end of this song like I do?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of gets me right back into like the album. As soon as it's over, I'm like ready to go again. You know what I mean? It's a great. The last like 3 songs, I guess I would say, are great to like work out to, like to run to and stuff. I was definitely enjoying that. So it works for working, exercising. Great for probably not too great for the family. I haven't really tried that too much.
My wife
let me tell you
hated
let me tell you what it's not good for. I mentioned that I kind of fell in love with this album while driving to Florida. You'll end up going 100 miles an hour at the end of that song. Like, you actually physically cannot stop speeding up along with the song. What do you make of it, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, I like the concept of it. It is like really cool to, like you said, you're sort of at like this like such a high like pace this whole time, and then to like somehow crescendo from there is like it's an impressive technical feat, I think.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'll ask both of you, but I just have a feeling only Dan will have something to really say here about lowlights. Anything that you really hated. For me, it's just like, it's such a short album that it's like, I can imagine quibbling about the interlude tracks. I think they serve an important purpose, maybe not like the most fun things to listen to themselves, but every like proper song is, to me, like a minor masterpiece. Is there anything you really hated, Dan?
No, I don't think like anything on the record is like a specific like low light. I don't want to get too, or I guess I'll just go ahead and move on to like summing up my thoughts on the record. But, like, it's just like as a whole, this is like not something I want to listen to at all. Like it's just a little too silly with like the voice, much too frantic for me. I kind of realize I don't listen to a lot of like fast music, I think. And it just too sugary for me. But I don't think like I really like I like the album like as a piece of art, like if I went to a museum and this like existed in a museum, I think I would appreciate it, and I do appreciate it. Like I really appreciate like the concept here, and even the execution of the concept. It's just like something, I'm not gonna hang it on my wall. I don't want to like. You can like a painting, appreciate like something about it, but like not want to hang it on your wall, not want to like it wouldn't be your favorite or anything. And I think that's how I feel here. Like I don't like hate this, right? And in fact, it's something that's even sort of hard for me to rate. Like on Rate Your Music, I gave it a bad score because I kind of just like looked at it like I keep my Rate Your Music as like a way. So when I don't know what I want to listen to, like I go through and I look through like what I've rated, and I say like, oh yeah, I forgot I liked that album, so I on there, I rate it in a way like you're never gonna want to really listen to this anymore.
Right. What'd you give it? What exactly did you give it?
I think I gave it like 1.5 stars.
Oh wow!
Wow. Did it move up at all?
No, I kept it there. God. But it's like. I wouldn't want to, if I was like writing a piece for a magazine or something, I don't think I would give it like, a 3 or something, because like I do like the concept, and I do like think that I do think it's like sort of like kind of worth hearing and experiencing. It's not something that like I think I would just normally with like things that I hate, like Anani or something, it's like I feel like you could just like completely disregard that. Like it does not need to like be heard. It's not adding anything to music or anything. Right. But here I think like this is adding something, and I think it's worth hearing. It's just like I don't know. It's like a painful experience, but I think that I mean, that sounds worse than
Dan just listens to like, what's that guy, Philip Nyblock? He listens to like minimalism. It's just like 6 hours of a single like violin note.
I literally was listening.
This is painful.
No, I was literally listening to
Ringtone,
Nyblock.
the
last
catchiest
night.
song ever written, is painful compared to Philip Nyblock.
I like a held tone for a good 20, 30, 45 minutes. I don't like a sugary, sweet, fast.
Yeah,
too many
painful.
tones for
There's too
right,
many
way
tones
too many
for
tones.
me. Yeah, no, exactly. But
Well-
I mean, like I say though, it's painful. But I think that I don't want that to sound like as harsh as it is. Like I when I look at it as a piece of art, like that makes me like it. I mean, you should feel something when you see art. I've talked about it before. Like I love Dada, I love Duchamp. Like I love Fountain. Which is the like toilet turned on its side. Do I think that's like the greatest painting in the world, like because it's not like aesthetically like the greatest looking thing. It's just like I love the concept of it and like what it did. So like I sort of feel like that here. Like this is like it honestly felt like very sort of like Dada to me.
Yeah, it's got that same spirit, I think. Darren, how would you sum up your thoughts on this or your feelings?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, I'm proud to feel like I'm on the right side of this record and the intent of this record. But, I think that this is just really fun to listen to. And it's very energetic. It's something that I definitely will kind of come back to when I just need just a shot of energy or something.
5 hour energy.
Exactly. It's not, I'm not necessarily like moved by it or, having my life changed by it, but you don't need every bit of music that you like to do that necessarily. I think there's a lot to enjoy. I think it's incredibly catchy. There's no doubt about that. It's definitely something that I think is worth listening to. I think it's one of those these albums that I think that we'll talk about like in the future, like looking back at
probably
the 2020s or something. This came out in 2019, but still I think that that'll be a topic of conversation, even if they don't really release anything great after this, or if the next record or whatever is more of the same. I think this one is one that we'll come back and talk about for sure.
Yeah, I wanted to ask. I mean, I guess it's just no secret that at this point that I just think it's like a fucking brilliant album, like an instant classic for me personally. But
is this a 10?
I do wonder. 10. Yeah, I'll give it a 10. Why not? You know how I feel about.
I know you just toss them out there.
It's just so many 10s. Yeah.
I'm like, if it's in the canon, it's a 10, and I just feel like this is an unforgettable album. And yet, my only hang up here, the only reason I hesitate on that is like, how do you guys think this album will sound in a few years? Like,
I think
it's a unique case, I think, where it is so tied to this moment that I have trouble even imagining.
Yeah, I think I have trouble imagining, it's, I don't know. Like when you make something that's like, especially like, I don't want to say like, I didn't think this was like a meme record or anything, but like when you make something that's like sort of based on internet culture, like that changes so quickly. When you think about like the memes and stuff we used to, like in the old days, in high school and stuff, it's like it's a completely like different style of joke for the most part. Even, it's like almost like a completely different world. And that's only been 10 years, even if you think of like,
or think about
memes 2 years ago or something, it's like so different.
But even though, like, more importantly, like, how they're like not funny at all. Like, have you ever seen, like, an old meme, like one of those like weird faces.
Yeah, those like rage comic things.
Yeah.
It's like not only is it not funny, it's like embarrassingly not funny. Yeah, it's like cringeworthy or whatever.
So if that's like the fate of all memes, then like, is that the fate of this album?
I don't know. I think like what Darren said, like it does like sort of have that like, I could see it being like the sound of the 2020s, even though it's 2019, which makes me think, like that's sort of a thing that happens, like a little bit of a overlap kind of thing. Like I think of like Depeche Mode, Violator, like that actually came out in 1990, but it's like the most 80s record ever.
Right.
I sort of feel like this kind of it's getting, yeah, I think you should kick it over to this decade. And I could see it being like something, that we look back and are like, oh, yeah, remember that. But I don't know if it'll be like, yeah, remember that. It's still good. I think it just might be like a moment in time or something. And I don't know, where do you go with another record of this? Do you just make the same thing? I wanted to listen. I know they have like the individual members have had like some other records, and I wanted to listen to them, but they weren't on Spotify, so I didn't care enough.
Yeah. I think that they like literally just got popular with this album. Just toiling in obscurity until then, but yeah, I do want to kind of address that, like what would be on the next album. But first, Darren, what do you think this will sound like in a few years? This album, at least.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be pretty dated, pretty quick. But I don't think that it will be forgotten necessarily. And that's kind of why I think that it'll be an album that we'll come back and talk about. Certainly, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, whenever we're kind of recapping the decade, I think that this album will probably see some influence, or make some influence, right? But it does worry me because I feel like a follow-up is just never going to capture the magic of like the first go around, you know what I mean? Like I don't know how you capture that again on a second record,
Yeah, I mean, if you were them, like, what would you do? Because, they have, like, this EP. The EP is self-titled 100 gecs, which is why they, added another 900 gecs for this album. But trivia fact also, the song Gek 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 only says Gek 58 times. So where are the missing gecs? Anyway, that EP... it sounds very much like proto this. I just don't even like really get anything out of it because it just feels like not, it just feels like this album turned down to 5 instead of to 11,
I heard one song from it and it just sort of seemed like the blueprint for this, and it was like, just listen to the fully formed, thing.
Yeah, right. So it makes me like very skeptical, kind of like, how would you turn up the heat on what we have on this album? Or do you think they have to do that? I mean, what would you do if you were 100 gecs?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I was thinking, like Death Grips. Like, I didn't hear Ex-Military, like, right when it came. I like most people, I found it, like, after Money Store. But I feel like if I heard Ex-Military, and that was the only Death Grips thing out at the time, I think I would listen to that and be like, how do you not just do the same thing again?
Right.
But then, they've released a handful of, great records past that. So I don't know. I feel like that gives me like, it can be done, but it's definitely like in that, like, it's good. It's a treacherous that, like it's going to be hard to get it done.
Yeah. What would you do, Darren?
I mean, I think you got to go with like the experimental double or triple album, right? You just got to
go.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it'll be like 40 minutes long.
Yeah. I don't know. Like, I just don't think that you can repeat this. This really has a bit of a lightning in a bottle type of element. Mm-hmm. I think you have to do something pretty different, and maybe scaling back is the way to go, or just focusing on some element of this. But to try to repeat, to try to turn it up even, to go even harder, I just don't think it's, you get to the point where like maybe you're trying too hard, right? And you're just trying to top what you did before, and I can't see that. I just can't seem to see that like working well, because when you listen to that next album, you're gonna be thinking about 1,000 gecs and how it compares.
Well, that's right. That's why I always say the thing I do about like make a difficult double album, because there's no possibility of fans not saying, well, it's not as good as 1,000 gecs.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you can make something that's like, yeah, it's not as good, but at least it's blank, or something like that. Mm-hmm. Add like a weird curveball, you can get away with it. But the other thing I kind of wonder, you guys were alluding to like, if this will be influential or not. The other thing that worries me, right, is like you've got somebody like Charlie XCX, who could be said to be like kind of an influence on this sound, the 100 gecs sound. I have kind of like problems with with Charlie XCX because I feel like she's kind of, I guess it's fine because it's like the Kanye style, but she like brings in producers from PC music and stuff like that, and just kind of like, I think, rides the wave a little bit. And on her new album that just came out like a month ago, she has Dylan from 100 gecs producing a couple tracks because, you know, that's the next thing, I think. What always confuses me about her in particular is like, she's kind of like watering down 100 gecs so that it is palatable for people like your coworker, Darren. And when you do that, I feel like you just completely lose the point of 100 gecs. Like if you just take what this is and try to like make it a little less spastic, and you know what I mean? Like it's not even anything anymore.
Yeah.
So I say that because I think, one, I worry that they will try to like commercialize and actually break into the mainstream or something in a Charlie XCX way. And I think that would be a big mistake. But I also worry about what kind of influence or legacy they'll have, because it would probably just be a lot of shit if it's just people kind of watering this down. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I could see, you know, like there's been plenty of things that like that where like a big mainstream, you know, like Drake does it all the time. You know, you take like some sort of like sort of underground kind of hit or something, and yeah, you make it palatable, and then in making it palatable, you like sort of ruin the original thing. And yeah, I mean that's been done forever, you know. But yeah, I mean that's a big worry. I could see them just being like producers, like you said too, you know. And maybe that would work because yeah, I mean I don't know. It's definitely like a hard. It's like a blessing and a curse to have like such a successful, you know, hit of a first record, because you're right, everyone's gonna say it's no 1,000 gecs, like you know, even if it's really great, you know.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think about does that intrigue you, or does that like make you shiver like it does for me, the idea, Darren, of like this sound trickling into the mainstream in a more palatable way?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it would lose the point entirely, you know, because I think so much of this music is built on pulling from the mainstream and what is palatable to people, and more in warping that. And if you take that away, you take out the warping effect. Then
you just have dubstep.
Yeah. Your remix is back to normal.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Okay. So at this point, you could have just listened to the album like 4 times.
Yeah, I know
how long we've talked about it. But I guess we can wrap it up by just like, any final thoughts on this album, or any final thoughts on the 100 gecs phenomenon, like why this album has just exploded in popularity and everything?
I mean, it's definitely interesting, and I think like anything that's like legitimately interesting. I mean, anything we can. I mean, I don't know how long we've been talking, an hour or hour and a half or so of a 20-something minute long record. You know, I mean, there's definitely like something interesting there, and I feel like anytime that exists, I mean, if you like music as a concept, like you know, the three of us do, it's worth your time. You know, like I said, I don't enjoy this as a piece of music. It's not a record like I'll probably ever return to, but it's like it's not something I'm like mad that I've heard. You know, it's worth the experience.
Yeah. Final thoughts, Darren?
Yep. I mean, I think that, you know, it's definitely of the moment, and like I mentioned before, it has an importance to what is going on right now, you know, and I think that not only should people listen to it right now because it's so of the moment, I think it'll be something that is worth returning to in the years to come, right? Because of the moment that it's sort of representing. So to me, it's a must listen, and I will certainly continue listening to it.
Yeah, I'll just wrap it up by kind of returning to the original Jeremy's original question with the whole Devo thing. You know, it was like we talked. I mean, we all were like totally fine with the idea that nobody could ever make like satirical music again. You know what I mean? Like in today's age, where it's too ironic. It's like internet culture is too out of control, and just like I don't know why I wasn't thinking of 100 gecs in that like sense at the time, but it's like when Jeremy said it, I was like, holy shit, that makes perfect sense. And it's actually incredible that they pulled that off. Like, we all three, I think, agreed that like the first listen, this was actually like shockingly horrible. You know what I mean? And how is anything even like surprising us still in today's day and age? But also because we're like people who obsess over music and listen to it constantly. I mean, for that alone, I think it's like worth the price of admission. But then it also has, I think, that magic where it just like will work its way into your brain, and you just find yourself like humming Money Machine or Stupid Horse to yourself like over and over again all day long.
All right. Well, what do you think? We'd love to read your thoughts on the air. You can email us, popshieldpod@gmail.com. Next episode, big surprise, not sure. So if you like the show, help us out, subscribe, leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast. Stay connected, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all that junk is @popshieldpod. And we'll see you in 2 weeks.
See ya.
So long.